I'm Sharanya Chandran. I'm Associate Director for Policy at JPAL South Asia. And as part of JPAL's efforts, I work with the team, with the policy team at JPAL South Asia across sectors and across state governments that we work with for, to build and to speak to JPAL's mission of translating research into action. And so sensitizing policymakers on what is good evidence, how to generate good evidence, forging partnerships with state governments, but equally with NGOs working on ground for partnering on rigorous randomized evaluations, and then disseminating the results of these evaluations to ensure that policies use rigorous evidence as one of the key inputs to decision making, and also to facilitate the scale up of evidence-based programs. So that's sort of our focus area, and of course the cross sectors that we work in, so health, education, labor markets, farms, governance, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, this is very exciting because a lot of people associate JPAL with RCTs and research, but now people are now seeing a lot of effort and focus that's being put into kind of translating that research into action, which is
absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, I think when we get started, I think there are two things for this pandemic that kind of strike out images for me. And first is kind of people coming out of their houses, banging the thalis, and that's first. And that's one image. And the contrasting second image I always have in my mind is like this migrants, hordes of them, packing everything they have on their backpacks and just walking to their native places, right? So just that second image is what I think we're going to be talking a lot about today. And so kind of one of the major themes of COVID, apart from health, is economic impact. And that has been kind of job losses for a lot of people. And that impact has felt unevenly. And it has kind of led to more inequalities, right? Like people who are at the bottom have suffered disproportionately more. So do you want to let's talk a bit more about how this has affected marginalized group, not only socially, but also in other form of marginalization, right? Do you want to talk more about that first?
Sure, Smith. I think this is really, as you said, these were very, very stark images that were brought in front of all of us during this pandemic, and very, very, worrisome in some sense. So I think the striking thing about this pandemic has really been that it took a visible outflux of people, large groups of people physically on the move, for us to recognize the extent of vulnerability of both migrants, but equally also unorganized sector workers in the economy. And so unemployment levels have been high, along with high stress on industries across various sectors, but particularly in, I think, manufacturing and service sectors, if you look at, which are really large employers. So in the absence of a lot of this granular data on workers, I think, researchers, of course, made estimates based on additional data of what was available. But really, what's important is studying migration corridors further to really understand what these difficulties were while assessing them. And as you correctly pointed out, inequalities were really exacerbated because existing social protection measures did not bring many workers into the fold. And sort of even the new measures that were announced at the start of the lockdown did not cast a wide enough net to cover everyone. So I think it's important to understand the overall job losses at the macro level. So for instance, as per the IMF, the Indian economy is expected to contract by over 10% in this financial year, while global level, it's expected to, at the global level, it's expected to contract only by about 4+%. And slowly the growth rate is expected to inch back and recover next year. And there is a wide range of sort of projected estimates for this forecast. So I think firms have really suffered a major setback in this process, particularly in manufacturing, accommodation, food services, wholesale, retail, real estate, all of these sectors. And some sectors like agriculture have shown resilience, greater resilience than one would have thought. And so, it's important to understand, I think, as a starting point, as to what firms have done to cope with this pandemic and ensuing lockdown, right? So majority of SMEs have, of course, unsurprisingly turned towards digital transformations as a thing to weather the economic impacts of COVID. Equally, many SMEs and MSMEs have reported to have reduced their workforce over the past 8+ months since the lockdown and administering pay cuts, sometimes deferred payments during others. So coming back to your point, I think the loss of jobs and this reverse migration that we saw must be understood in this broader context, where there were diverse challenges and differential outcomes across different states. So many states which deploy migrant workers as agricultural laborers, for instance, faced a shortage of labor supply for harvest and post-harvest operations. And on the other hand, you had states which were really the sending states of migrants which saw a return of migrants back to their homes, and then they were faced with challenges of excess labor supply. So I think the impact of this exodus of migrant workers from urban to rural areas in India in the wake of the lockdown really gave rise to some pressing challenges. And also, these migrants were likely to be returning from urban manufacturing hubs where the prevalence of COVID-19 was high, especially in states like Delhi, Maharashtra, or even Gujarat. So what's, I think, important is to really study migration corridors in detail to understand these patterns of predominant linkages between states, to understand the best ways to support migrants at both the source, but equally at destination states. And this is especially important in the case of seasonal migrants who travel for a few months in a year. And so social protection policies announced by the government soon after the lockdown provided some relief to those who had lost their source of livelihood. But critics do argue that this relief was targeted towards people who are already under some kind of welfare scheme like PDS or NREGA or Jan Dhan accounts, and really did not address those who experienced recent job losses and who may have been pushed into vulnerability due to the pandemic. And even relief meant for people outside the PDS through Atmanirbhar package did not fully address the needs of migrants, as many of them returned to their homes by the time the relief was announced. So it's kind of they lost out. And similarly, by tying these, say, cash transfers to things like registrations in the BOCW, Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Board, was tricky because many states don't even register migrants at that, in those high numbers. And as registration rates are low, this was also another reason why a large number of migrants missed out. So I think this issue is very complex and needs to be understood, given all of these related trends, and it's more complex than just just simply seeing these images that we saw in the media.
Yeah, so let's try to kind of talk more about some of the specifics, right? So one of the central aspect that migration provides is kind of temporary migrants, which are just come like who in the harvesting season would go back home and then return after the harvesting season goes. And there are some migrants who kind of settle like for medium or long term. So some of these are kind of very nuanced aspect of labor force participation in India, right? So do you see this pandemic changing some of the labor force participation trends that we have seen?
No, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest issues that we are facing is that people have dropped out of the labor force and have stopped looking for jobs, which is really a worrisome trend. Because while unemployment rates have shown recovery over the past 8 months, this declining labor force participation rate, as the working age people stop seeking jobs, or even even though there are reports which show that over the past month this is slowly improving, very, very slowly, but say, as noted by CMIE experts, even a small range, even a small change in this labor force participation rate is quite significant, because if you're looking like at a working age population of, say, a billion people in India, a 2% drop would mean 20 million people are moving out of the labor force, which is a staggering number, right? So you're absolutely right. I think this is one of the core issues that we are facing currently. And since the lockdown was announced, we saw huge fluctuations in the labor market, and sort of these fluctuations are expected to last for a time, for a while now. But I think what's crucial is to unpack this shifting workforce composition, demand for labor, and work preferences to more effectively match workers to firms and to jobs. So we need to really conduct deep diagnostic exercises for the whole ecosystem in labor markets, so including the skilling ecosystem of companies, the training providers, employers, sector-based industry consortia, etc., and develop like sort of I think projected changes in labor markets to kind of take note of those while looking at what some of these trends could look like, and especially understanding the reliance on migrant workers from the demand side. I think that's really key. So working on instituting mechanisms will really will have to understand labor demand side of things and hiring patterns by consolidating existing administrative data on short and long-term skilling programs, unemployment, and also equally, along with that admin data, conducting surveys with a sample of these cohorts to understand the patterns, more detailed understanding of the patterns of skilling levels, but equally income by type of trade, by location, by industrial activity, and skilling manpower requirements. What are the aspirations and how do they match with the demand for skilling amongst youth, especially when you're trying to look at online learning formats. So all of these, I think this is the need of the hour. And work is also needed to find strategies to encourage labor force participation, because that's again key, because if people are kind of opting out because they are not either finding jobs or losing sort of that faith and this thing in the market, then that's sort of something that needs to be addressed immediately. And finally, I think amid all the uncertainty, and this I emphasized earlier as well, improving the reach for social protection for workers of any type is absolutely essential. So while simultaneously working on improving these labor market outcomes in the long run.